Something historic just happened in the waters that feed the world's economic bloodstream, and most Americans are still asleep to what it really means. The Strait of Hormuz, that narrow 21-mile-wide choke point between Iran and Oman, has become the single most consequential piece of ocean on the planet right now. And the arrangement quietly taking shape around who gets in and who gets turned away is rewriting the rulebook of global power faster than any Pentagon briefing or cable news alert is willing to admit. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi announced that ships owned by 5 nations, China, Russia, India, Iraq, and Pakistan, would be allowed to transit the Strait of Hormuz, while vessels connected to the United States, Israel, and their allies faced outright prohibition. Read that again slowly. Because what just happened is not merely a naval incident. It is an announcement, a declaration, really, of a new geopolitical grammar written in salt water and crude oil. The old world where America patrolled the seas and called the shots from every corner of the globe, that world is being renegotiated right now, ship by ship, barrel by barrel, in the Persian Gulf. The disruption has affected roughly 20% of the world's daily oil supply, and Brent crude prices surged past $100 per barrel for the first time in 4 years, reaching as high as $126 per barrel at its peak, the largest disruption to the energy supply since the 1970s energy crisis. Think about that for a moment. This is not a simulation. This is not a hypothetical in a graduate level geopolitics seminar. This is happening right now in real time. And the economic shockwaves are landing on everyday American families at the gas pump, at the grocery store, in every corner of the domestic economy where petroleum touches daily life, which is everywhere. Now let's talk about China, because that is the conversation that the mainstream media refuses to have with any real honesty or depth. Beijing adopted a strategy of securing passage through bilateral channels, meaning that China preferred to rely on domestic diplomacy and direct communication with Tehran to ensure the safety of its tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. This strategy proved successful as some Chinese ships continued to pass through despite the near total closure of the strait to US and allied vessels. That sentence right there should be read in every boardroom in America, in every think tank on the Potomac, in every energy ministry across the Western Alliance. China played a different game, a quieter game, and for a period of time, it was a more effective game. A Chinese-owned container ship called the New Voyager slipped down a narrow channel past the red sands of Larak Island soon after sunrise, emerging safely in the Arabian Sea while broadcasting the message, "All crew China." A Chinese company paid Iranian authorities for the vessel's safe passage. There it is. A Chinese company paid Iranian authorities for passage rights through a waterway where American ships are forbidden to go. Let that sink in. In a choke point that determines the fate of 20% of global oil, the Chinese bought their way through while the United States Navy, the most powerful maritime force in the history of human civilization, was left managing the chaos of its own making after ordering the strikes that triggered this crisis in the first place. China receives 45% of its oil via the Strait of Hormuz. That is an enormous strategic dependency. And the way Beijing managed it tells you everything about the sophistication of Chinese statecraft versus the blunt instrument of American military adventurism. While Washington was bombing Iranian nuclear sites and eliminating Iran's supreme leader, Beijing was on the phone with Tehran, quietly negotiating safe corridors. While the US was issuing ultimatums and forming coalition requests that almost nobody answered, China was paying fees and sailing ships, pragmatism over ideology, commerce over confrontation. It is a masterclass in the kind of patient, interest-based foreign policy that has been the hallmark of Chinese strategy across the entire post-Cold War era. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel initiated coordinated airstrikes on Iran under Operation Epic Fury, targeting military facilities, nuclear sites, and leadership, resulting in the death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. That is the moment everything changed. That is the moment a military decision transformed into an economic earthquake that is still shaking the foundations of the global system. And here is the ugly truth that Washington does not want to say out loud. The country that launched those strikes, the country that killed Iran's supreme leader and triggered the closure of the world's most critical energy corridor, is now the country whose ships are banned from the very waterway it claimed it was protecting. The IRGC announced that the strait is closed to any vessel going to and from the ports of the US, Israel, and their allies. Several Iran-approved ships passed the strait during the conflict, mostly petroleum ships bound for China and India, some with military escort. So the new reality on the water is as stark as it gets. Iranian-approved vessels, mostly carrying petroleum to China and India, are moving through with military escort. American-flagged or American-connected ships are blocked. There is your new Hormuz hierarchy, drawn in blood and crude oil, and it is not the hierarchy that 5 decades of American naval dominance was supposed to produce. China rejected President Trump's call to form an international force to protect oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, emphasizing that it is not a party to the conflict and calling for de-escalation. China also refused to link cooperation to Trump's visit to Beijing. This is the geopolitical judo move of the decade. Trump called on Beijing to join a coalition. China said no, calmly, firmly, and without drama. Trump then tried to link his planned visit to Beijing with Chinese cooperation on Hormuz. Chinese intelligence, military, defense, and security circles considered this a form of unacceptable American political blackmail and bullying. China maintained official silence regarding American requests for military assistance, merely stating that communication is ongoing. Think about the symbolism embedded in that response. China is operating with such confidence, such strategic self-assurance, that it can publicly absorb pressure from the President of the United States, decline his request, refuse his linkage, and walk away without blinking. That is not the behavior of a rising power that is uncertain of itself. That is the behavior of a power that has already arrived and knows it. The Strait of Hormuz isn't completely closed, as several daring ship captains risked attacks from Iran to transport cargoes through the narrow Persian Gulf waterway, with some claiming to be Chinese. That detail, ship captains claiming to be Chinese to get safe passage, is one of the most extraordinary maritime stories of the 21st century. The Chinese flag in the waters around Hormuz in 2026 is functioning as a passport to free movement. The American flag is functioning as a target marker. If that does not crystallize the transformation of global power dynamics happening right now in the Persian Gulf, nothing will. Ship tracking data shows that Chinese tanker and container ships have all but ceased transit since the conflict began, leaving dozens of Chinese ships trapped in the Persian Gulf. This data underscores China's limited ability to shape the course of the conflict, even to protect its own strategic and commercial interests. And this is where the story gets genuinely complex, because China's situation is not one of triumphant control. It is one of complicated exposure. Beijing is Iran's largest trading partner, its economic lifeline, the buyer of 90% of its oil exports. But that deep dependency cuts both ways. When Iran closes the strait, China's energy supply chain bleeds too. Iran blocked 2 Chinese-flagged container vessels from transiting the Strait of Hormuz on March 27th. The ships, CSCL Indian Ocean and CSCL Arctic Ocean, turned around near Larak Island, 20 miles from the Iranian port city of Bandar Abbas. Right there is the contradiction at the heart of the Hormuz arrangement. Iran announced it would allow Chinese ships to pass, and then it blocked Chinese ships from passing. Because what Iran is actually managing is not a clean bilateral arrangement. It is a wartime chokepoint administration where the rules shift based on military calculations, internal IRGC politics, and the fog of an active conflict that has already killed Iran's supreme leader and shattered its command and control infrastructure. According to Iranian state media, Iran is blocking all ships transiting to and from countries it considers supportive of the United States and Israel. Only vessels carrying cargoes of Iran-destined household goods, cars, clothing, and pharmaceuticals are being permitted to cross the Strait of Hormuz. So the real arrangement is not China gets control. The real arrangement is Iran has control, and Iran is making case-by-case decisions about who passes and who doesn't, based on a rapidly shifting calculation of political loyalty, military necessity, and commercial negotiation. The Chinese flag earns you a better conversation with Tehran than the American flag. But it does not guarantee you a free pass. Nothing guarantees a free pass right now except carrying goods that Iran itself needs. From March 1 to March 15th, a total of 11 China-linked vessels transited through the Strait of Hormuz, according to Lloyd's List Intelligence, mostly general cargo ships, while tankers operated by mainstream Chinese owners still avoided the route. One China-owned vessel broadcasting China owner via AIS during transit was struck by shrapnel while sailing from the Middle East Gulf toward Jebel Ali in the United Arab Emirates on March 12th, a development that has since deterred further Chinese transits. 11 vessels in 15 days on a waterway that was previously handling over 150 ships per day. And one of those Chinese ships still got hit. The arrangement, such as it is fragile, chaotic, and operating under the constant threat of IRGC naval forces, whose own command structure has been severely degraded by US and Israeli strikes. On 15th of March, Donald Trump called on countries of the world that receive oil through the Hormuz Strait to take care of that passage militarily. The following day, several US-aligned NATO countries rejected Trump's request, including Germany, Spain, Italy, Estonia, the United Kingdom, Australia, South Korea, and Japan, as well as the European Union. The isolation of the American position in this crisis is staggering when you look at it clearly. The United States went to war against Iran, a war that triggered the closure of the world's most critical energy choke point, and then turned to its closest allies and said, "Help me fix this." And the allies said no. Germany said no. Japan said no. The European Union said no. Australia said no. These are not adversaries. These are the countries that signed mutual defense treaties, that host American bases, that buy American weapons systems. And they looked at the Hormuz crisis and said, this is not our problem to solve. A total of 22 countries, including the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Japan, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates, signed a statement declaring their willingness to contribute to appropriate efforts to ensure safe passage in the Strait of Hormuz, and that preparations were underway. Words on paper, declarations of willingness. Meanwhile, the United States began an aerial campaign against Iranian targets to reopen the Strait of Hormuz on March 19th, deploying A-10 Thunderbolt II jets to strike fast-attack watercraft and Boeing AH-64 Apache gunships to handle one-way attack drones. America went alone, as it so often does, paying the full military and economic price of a geopolitical decision that has reshaped the global order without any of its allies willing to share the burden. If Western countries provide armed escorts for commercial vessels, it might escalate into a military confrontation between Iran and a broader Western coalition. A more viable strategy for Iran might be to demonstrate its resilience against strikes and its capacity to sustain retaliatory operations over the long term, increasing the likelihood that any eventual resolution unfolds on terms more favorable to itself. That analysis, from a Chinese military affairs expert speaking to the Global Times, is precisely the strategic logic that guides Iranian behavior in this crisis. Iran does not need to win a military exchange with the United States Navy. Iran needs to make the cost of the conflict prohibitive enough that Washington begins to search for an exit. And the Strait of Hormuz is the pressure valve through which that cost is applied, not just on American military assets, but on the global economy, on oil prices, on the financial stability of every country that imports petroleum through that choke point. China's approach is to preserve its strong commercial relationships with Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates, while also leveraging its influence as Iran's top trading partner to help safeguard its access to crude oil. This approach is expected to continue, regardless of who runs the government in Tehran. That sentence captures the entire philosophy of Chinese Middle East policy in a single breath. Beijing does not pick sides in the ideological sense. Beijing picks interests, and its interests in the Middle East are served by maintaining relationships on all sides of every conflict simultaneously. While America bombed Tehran and backed Riyadh in a long geopolitical rivalry, China was trading with both, talking to both, and positioning itself as the indispensable commercial partner for the entire region, regardless of which side of the sectarian divide or the American security architecture any given country happened to occupy. The deeper story here is not about ships and shipping lanes. The deeper story is about the fundamental question of who gets to define the rules of the global commons. For 70 years, since the end of World War II, the answer to that question has been the United States. American naval power, anchored by carrier strike groups and forward bases scattered across the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, and the Persian Gulf, has enforced an international maritime order that, whatever its flaws and contradictions, kept the major shipping lanes open and the global trading system functioning. That era is now being stress tested in ways that it has never been tested before. Because the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz is not just a military confrontation, it is a referendum on whether American power can still guarantee the global commons when that power has itself become the source of the disruption. On a normal day, 60 tankers, and as many as 90, go through the Strait of Hormuz. Since March 1st, only 78 vessels have been detected passing through the strait for a daily average of 13. Thousands of seafarers are stranded aboard vessels in the adjacent waters. thousands of human beings sitting on ships in the Gulf of Oman, waiting for a political and military situation to resolve itself so they can do the utterly ordinary work of moving goods from one part of the world to another. That is the human face of this geopolitical earthquake. Behind every barrel of oil, behind every container ship, behind every AIS transponder signal on a satellite tracking screen, there are real people caught in the wreckage of decisions made by governments and militaries that treat the seas as a chessboard. What you are watching unfold in the Strait of Hormuz in the first quarter of 2026 is not just a crisis, it is a crystallization. It is a moment where all the long-building trends in global power, the rise of China as a genuine peer competitor, the erosion of American alliance cohesion, the weaponization of energy flows as geopolitical leverage, the emergence of a multipolar world where different nations play by different rules, all come into sharp focus around one 21-mile-wide strip of water between Iran and Oman. The arrangement that gives China preferred access while American ships are denied entry is not a secret conspiracy. It is the logical outcome of decades of strategic choices, relationship building, and geopolitical positioning. China cultivated Tehran. America bombed it. And now the Strait of Hormuz is telling you in the clearest possible terms which approach produced better results in the specific arena of getting oil tankers safely through a war zone.